Hello and a warm welcome to our masterclass with the title Outperform Your Sector Using Benchmarks for Strategic Decision Making. Today, what we want to explore is on how the value balancing alliance with the abbreviation VBA and WIFO Institute's recently published impact benchmarks can help organizations move from measurement to meaningful action, and also explore on how you can use them to gain a competitive edge in your sector. And for that, we are joined by an exceptional group of speakers who bring both the scientific and the practical experience in today's topic. And I'm very much excited to dive into this conversation with them. Before that, I would like to introduce myself. This is Richard. I'm heading the impact analysis team of WIFO, and I'm an economist from my profession. And I'm so happy to be joined by our exceptional speakers that will introduce themselves in a second. So we are joined here by Anne Spranger. Do you want to say one word or one sentence to you? Cool.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Anne. I have also some speaking bits today, and we are one of those very grateful recipients of a benchmark.
Thank you so much, Anne. And we are joined by Christian Heller.
Hi all, welcome. I'm Christian. I have the pleasure to lead the Value Balancing Alliance, and next to this, I'm still employed by a company called BASF, where I was building up impact accounting over 10 years' time and taking over several roles in different committees with policymakers, with standard setters, and in the business community around sustainability, impact, and sustainable finance.
Thank you, Christian. Roman Godau, over to you.
Yeah, nice to see you or meet you all. I'm Roman. I'm part of Novartis Impact Measurement and Evaluation team, and from that role, seconded to the VBA to be the Director of Public Affairs and helping to spread the word for impact valuation.
Thank you so much. And we're joined by Professor Dennis Ostwald.
Hi, this is Dennis. Nice to meet you all. Great pleasure to be part of this exceptional round in this masterclass. I'm the CEO and founder of WIFO Institute, and WIFO has around 80 employees in the topics of labor market, impact valuation, and health, and looking very much forward to give you some insights.
Thank you so much. So we are thrilled about all the participants today. And before I share the agenda for today, I would like to start with a poll question, such that we know to whom we are speaking here. So please click on the link that was shared by Katja just in the chat. And we want to know in which sector do you work in? And we have some opportunities. So are you either coming from healthcare or medtech industry? Are you coming from manufacturing or industry? Are you coming from the public sector, finance or investment, academia or research, sustainability or ESG consulting, or of course, any other thing? Thanks for posting this in the chat, but I would like you to click on the link and use the poll, because then we can all see the results directly on Minimeter. And what we can see is that lots of people are coming from the sustainability ESG space, lots of people coming from health, also lots of others, and some from manufacturing and research. That's great. Good to know for us, because we would love to know our audience. But now I would like to share what we have planned together with you. So we will hear together both from the business and from the policies perspective on how we can use those benchmarks. So the goal of today's session is really to explore on how sustainability benchmarks can be used, not just to track performance, but also to support better, faster, and more strategic decision making. And we will hear then first a keynote from Christian Heller, and then deep dive into specific use cases from a business context with Dennis Oswald, and we have an interview with Anne Spranger. And after that, we will shift the perspective and look on the benchmarks from a policies perspective, and we will hear their insights from Professor Dennis Ostwald and Roman Godau before we then have about 10 minutes for questions and answers with our experts. So with that, I stop sharing my screen and hand over to Christian Heller. The floor is yours.
So many thanks. I think you have all seen it's a quite packed agenda. So I'm trying to be as precise and concise as possible in the next, let's say, 8 minutes to introduce a little bit why we are collaborating with Y4, not just in this regard, but especially with regard to benchmarks. Maybe as a first reflection, the work what we are doing around impact accounting is a rather new discipline, but it's not totally new. There has been quite a lot of work done so far. It goes back over 15 years. And just to highlight a few aspects, so the work around impact accounting is embedded in the CSRD regulation. There was a project done with the European Commission around natural capital accounting, which was operated also by the VBA. In addition, the work what we are doing is heavily based on value factors. In the end, these are monetary prices for different ESG impacts, and Y4 was the first one who has really published value factors, so you can download them, you can access them, and you can start to understand what is the true impact of the business you are running or the decisions you are taking. What is quite important is that the methodologies we are developing in this regard are going to be standardized and harmonized. This is work which is done by the International Foundation for Value and Impact, in short IFVI, in a close collaboration with the ecosystem, including the VBA, including Y4, and the other players in this room. What might become a quite prominent driver in this regard is the OECD. The OECD has just kicked off a process 4 weeks ago, 3 years to deep dive into industry average data, as well as what we call the value factors, so the prices. And interestingly, their target audience is business as well as policymakers, because we see a tremendous benefit in these kinds of information for policymaking and incentivizing best practice by corporates. And industry benchmarks, as we are going to lay it out throughout this course, are quite important step to get this running. When we are talking about impact accounting, I think the business community is well aware of the risk return doctrine, but we have entered a totally new time with regard to our societies and economies, that we need to take natural capital and social capital much more into account in decision making, because it's affecting directly business resilience and profits. So impact accounting is, call it a tool or call it a solution to better integrate different capitals into one system. And impact accounting works quite easily in the end. It's a two-step process. You're measuring something and then you're valuing something. The measuring is what we all need to do as businesses now with the new reporting requirements kicking in. CSRD and the EFRAG ESRS are most prominent for all of us. IFRS, GI are just on top the international level. This different metrics or data points we are converting with value factors into the business language. This is money. So in the end, it's all about how you monetize ESG metrics into, let's say, information which can be really implemented within business decision making. And depending on the use case, you're just using different valuation methodologies. If you're looking into impacts to society, this is around social cost of carbon. If you're looking into value to business, we are talking about mitigation abatement costs. If you're looking into the impact on your financials, so the financial statement, we are talking about market prices like taxes. And this is, I think, one of the paths forward, how we are also trying to bridge the double materiality. So inside out, outside in perspective, going really down to the financial bottom line. When we're talking about impacts, you might have heard around environmental profit and loss account, integrated profit and loss accounts, and all sorts of things. And they are disclosed by companies in totally different ways. So what you see on this slide, it's all based on the same methodologies, the same principles, but as a stakeholder, especially as an investor, you have no clue that these companies talk about the same stuff. We had quite a lot of discussions with the investor community, mainly asset managers and asset owners, and they have asked us, please come up with pure numbers and link them as close as possible to financial statements. So what you see here on the right-hand side is in the end, building on this step, the performance of a company around sustainability. You can also say this is the overall performance around sustainable value creation, positive and negative impacts across a value chain along different indicators from one company. Where we want to go with that one, the first one, yes, is comply with regulation, CSRD in specific, but we need to go beyond. This is something where companies need to look into long-term competitiveness and business resilience. So therefore, we are making use of this information for strategy development, for target setting, for decision-making in case of trade-offs, and so on and so on. Could you please go on mute? There's someone's not on mute. Maybe you find the person to mute. Thank you. Last but not least, even with the CSRD, sustainability performance as disclosed by companies is not yet really comparable. If you're looking into the first CSRD reports in the Nordic countries, we have 20 to 40 pages. In Germany and France, we have 200 to 400 pages, so there is somehow a difference. And the question what we need to ask, be it as a company on our own, but also be it as stakeholders, especially in investors. How is the company performing against a certain benchmark? And the benchmark in the best case are the peers, so is the industry or the sector. And based on the work of Vifor, and many, many thanks for your contribution in this regard, we are now able in the end to map a corporate footprint like this against an industry average. And this in a certain intensity. That means on the sector, we are talking about a link to €1 output, and with regard to the company, €1 revenues. And what you just see here on this page is to understand if the company is outperforming or underperforming its industry. And this gives a quite clear notion, first of all, for the decision makers within the companies where to improve, or where to position themselves that they are more competitive than the others. But second, it's a quite clear signal for policymakers as well as for investors where risks and opportunities are with regard to a certain company or with regard to a certain sector. And this is what we are going to discuss with you in the next 3 interviews and interventions. So we are looking forward to the input from my dear friends and colleagues, and then open for any kinds of Q&As. Many, many thanks for your patience.
Thanks so much, Christian. I'm always overwhelmed when I see how much work and for how long the story of impact evaluation is already doing, and how many stakeholders, both from the public but also from the business side, are working on that. And many thanks for also from my side, Christian, on how to really make it clear why it's so important, not only to measure the impact of a corporate or an investor, but also to have a benchmark to that we then can compare those impacts. That was very, very clear, but we are here now to understand what is the use cases, the concrete use cases of those benchmarks. And for that, I would like to hand over to the business perspective to Dennis Oswald for a presentation on how to use those benchmarks for the materiality assessment and investor relations. Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Richard. Can you see my screen?
Okay, yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, thank you, Christian, for your first statement, and really impressive work what you have done. You connected the dots over the last years to that we are now here at this step. And I would say it's a huge step to have this benchmarks, this sector benchmarks, because we are creating much more use cases, right? In the past, we discussed a lot about methodology, and there is still discussions ongoing. But I would say for most of the use cases, the right methodology is in place, the right data is there. Now we need to convince people not by seeing impact valuation as a standard we need to implement, but more impact valuation which answers question or solves problems companies, sectors, or governments are seeing, right? So the why do we need impact valuation is my topic, and I will present a couple of use cases now. The first one will be about double materiality assessment, what Christian already mentioned, that we have an inside-out and outside-in perspective, and CSRD is requesting double materiality. So I will give you an example about this. Then also the investor side is really important. So I will give a use case of investor relations, and in my second part later on, at around Q3, I will give you a policy perspective. Just I want to explain you once again what does it mean? What insights do we create because we are dealing also with the healthcare industry, and here you can see an example of a benchmark, only the sector, right? You have the GDP contribution of the sector per euro. And then you can see how much is own operations and how is the effect along the full supply chain. So direct and indirect suppliers. And here you can see, first point is in the healthcare sector, the negative externalities are 6 times higher than the effects on operations. And now you can deeper analyze the first tier, second tier, third tier. So how much can you influence these numbers? But first of all, we can see that the major part of the environmental negative externalities happens along the supply chain. And on the other hand, we see in own operations concerning occupational health, safety, human rights, and you have a higher effect in the own operations. So maybe you have a need for action to do though within your company and within your sector. And you can see it's in comparison nearly in healthcare twice as much as environmental own operations. And it's less than around 1/5 of the negative environmental externalities. This is a sector view. And you now can analyze water, air emission, GHG, and you can compare them, right? We are always talking about GHG, but it's only in healthcare 0.04 cents per euro. Water is -10. That means it's 2.5 times more important, more material than GHG in healthcare sector. So you can create insights to create need for actions on sector level, but the same also on company level. So coming to double materiality assessment, CSRD requires companies to apply double materiality. And so they need to deliver it. And so with this data and with the benchmarks, for the first time, you can really point out what is the inside-out perspective, what is the impact to society, and partly also what is the impact to business when we are talking about risks. And here you can see on this slide that we have material topics. It's a fictive company, right? But we can see here waste is the company much higher than the benchmark in the sector. We can see in land use, the company impact is nearly twice as high as average in the sector. And human rights, the same, even more, and GHG emissions. So you have an immediate view on your company and you can say, where are my topics, right? What's material? And this is something you could never ever had before, because you never ever had the comparison with the same methodology of the sector you are dealing in. So coming closer to the double materiality assessment, looking at the GHG emissions, why it is so important, because we have the highest impact concerning GHG emissions within the company compared to the benchmark. So it's critical, and it's critical because it's very much related to regulatory compliance, climate change, and economic impacts for the company. That means it can have negative impacts due to increased energy costs, carbon taxes, and so you can now drill down and look into the single topics within your company, and then you can create need for action, and you can manage these risks by having these insights. Here you can see the waste and occupational health and safety and human rights and all the topics we have identified as material, but along the supply chain, right? And that means, especially on the one hand, you have their own operations, which you can maybe manage better, but you have also the effect, the material topics along the supply chain. And here you can see that this may give additional risk due to the supply chain disruption or regulatory penalties or increased costs, and this will influence the company's overall market position. Think about a company which exceeds GHG emissions benchmarks. It risks regulatory penalties or increased operational costs or reputational damage, which could undermine its financial performance and competitive edge. So in the end, we can also think about that maybe stricter rules will come up. And so we need to think about points like carbon taxes, supply chain due diligence laws, and so on, and so on, and so on. So it helps. And now if this risk occur, then we are coming towards the next use case, investor relations. And this is something what we discussed, and Christian already mentioned that we are talking to asset managers and so on. You can now see and compare sectors. Where are their environmental damages compared to other industries? And so do you want to really invest in sector like food and beverages if it comes to value to society? Or would it be better to invest in healthcare concerning environmental damages? Because here in healthcare, you have only an environmental damage of 21 cents per €1 revenue. And you can see that it's the third cleanest, greenest sector compared to the 11 selected. And so this can be a guidance for investor relation to may decide in which area I want to invest. And then you can also take the benchmarks of the company data into account, and you can compare the companies in the sector as well. Yeah, thank you so much. Here is the last slide of my first speech. Here you can see in comparison to the environmental damages, also the comparison of the societal damages due to occupational health and safety, and as well as human rights. And yes, food and beverages is on the top again. Healthcare is in the middle now. And so you can analyze, and you can see that you have 12 cents negative and 3 cents positive impacts in healthcare per euro revenue. And this is for us, we are convinced that this kind of data, which is applicable for every sector and every country in the world, gives transparency about what are smart decisions in terms of value to society and value to business. Thank you so much, Richard. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Dennis, for those valuable insights, especially on the health industry. And of course, all those data points are available for the other sectors that we have benchmarks as well. I'm always overwhelmed on how many insights there are in those studies and those kinds of numbers, and especially that it's not only insights, but that impact valuation also helps to understand. So it also makes your life easier when you can compare different indicators with each other. So it does not only put more complication on it, but it also makes it easier to understand. But now we want to deep dive a little bit, not in the healthcare sector, but into one part of the healthcare sector, which is the medtech industry, for which we already have applied a benchmarking at an even more granular level. And a great example for that is the SEE, which is Social, Environmental and Economic Impact Study, conducted by WIFO Institute for the BWMed, the German Medical Technology Association. So thank you, Anna, for being here with us today. I would like to, Anna, sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much for having the opportunity to speak about our benchmark exercise. It already has been some years ago, but it's very exciting.
Indeed, it was 3 years ago, and the BWMed was a pioneer who first commissioned an industry-wide benchmark report, the SEE impact study of the Germany's medtech sector. So what made you commission the study at that time?
Yeah, so firstly, there was always this very deeply felt social responsibility within the sector, because you have always the patient at the very center of your heart. So social and ecological responsibility was also very much ingrained into the sector. But there was also another factor. If you remember the time 3 years ago, we just came out of the COVID-19 pandemic. There was this harsh light on supply chains and our dependency on transportations and logistics worldwide. And there were a lot of new awareness towards ecological footprints, and also they had like these pictures of these huge waste mountains of, for example, protection equipment. So there was this window of opportunity to have this discussion for a benchmark, and we wanted to actively shape a discussion and not just have this never-ending loops of discussions about methodology and what to do and how to calculate a footprint. So we started to engage with you guys, with V4, and started to involve in benchmarking. And for us, it was very important because it's such a heterogeneous sector. So we are talking as an association. So we needed to have an idea and very much clarity about the methodology, about indicators, about what data years we are talking, and also about data availability. So that was our very much common ground to start with benchmark. And some political consensus, not the least important factor was also the political landscape back at the time. If you remember, we had the Greens in the German coalition. We had a lot of talks about social and ecological responsibility on the horizon. So we actually wanted to be one on the forefront in this time for this discussion.
Thank you so much. It's good to be reminded what happened through those 3 years. That's always interesting to have a look back. So which were the insights that were most useful for you from the study?
Yeah. First of all, I remember the very exact moment where I finally had my head around the data availability of the project within the benchmark. So I guess it was our 3rd or 300th meeting. And I finally gathered that we have data available for the majority of all countries worldwide. So we had like 188 countries in the study. And we had a huge, a reliable, a very highly standardized data set for each of this country. So we didn't have a questionnaire for direct suppliers and a teeny tiny data sample to calculate from, but you had a worldwide data availability scope. And that was really mind-blowing for me. And on the other hand, I remember that we settled on a set of indicators for this benchmark. So we had it very much pinpointed to very close indicators that are close to our heart, which were like child labor as human rights, but also the occupational hazard to be employed within the German medical technical sector. So these indicators really helped to gather ground on what to do and what to measure. And that was really helpful. And of course, the benchmark itself was, for us, the first time we had an insight in our supply chains, and not just a direct supplier, but we went back to, 98 degree of suppliers, or to the really deep end of the supply chain. So for us, that was really valuable, because even if you are very dedicated to social and ecological responsibility within your home country, which is here Germany, you have also responsibility to the supply chain. And for the first time, you had data and not just a feeling that maybe you have like China to blame or whatever. So, but you really actually had some grounds and some facts to base your decisions on. And after we settled these discussions, it felt that we actually had a lot of energy available, because we had passed the point of discussions about methodology, about indicators, about blame shifting around the supply chain, but we actually could go into decision making and go into the active mode to tackle our ecological and social footprint.
Oh wow, I'm so happy that you, after digging deep into those data points, you still had energy for taking action. That is a good sign. So can you share a specific moment or an example where those findings really made an impact or changed the conversation? So how can those data points be used to drive action?
Yeah, so when we received the report and also the data behind it, we immediately started to look into supply chains, and you also had us analyze the top 3 polluters within each of these indicators. So it was like really easy to target your attention to these 3 polluters. But it was really funny for me to see that when we received the study and handed it and promoted it to our firms, the first question was like, hey, we are promoting really good, but it's missing. So they looked at the waste indicator specifically, and it was like, that cannot be true. But of course, this benchmark was targeted specifically on the upstream and on the gate-to-gate operation in Germany. So we didn't have the client or the hospital is actually producing the waste. So our production and all teams shifted into action and said, okay, we had to measure this part. This is not telling the whole picture. So even taking more responsibility, which I remember a very positive discussion back then. And we also very much started into the raw resources. So there popped up some questions about very specific resources in the supply chains and very specific points in the world. And we really had an easy way to find out what raw resources are these, if we really need them or if we can go around them. So that was really a difficult time to go for the really hard polluters in the first time.
Thanks so much. We're proud that it somehow helped to prioritize your actions. So that's really good insights. Now, looking ahead, what additional data or insights do you believe are needed today to build on that and evolving the benchmarking to approach further?
Yeah, just we mentioned it already 3 times. It has been 3 years ago. So an update and the regular monitoring would be really nice, because it cannot be a one-time approach and then you tackle China and all the raw resources are safe. That's not the world we are living in, and no supply chain is operating in. So a regular monitoring would really help to understand the development over time, also knowing there is this pandemic just back then there was a pandemic year we analyzed, so maybe we are back to the bad guys or being the good guys. So we need a regular monitoring to know where we stand. On the other hand, you need also to control your sustainable strategy against other sectors. So you heard that we are not really having the benchmark on a company base here, but on a sector base. So of course, we jumped into action to compare ourselves against the automobile or the agricultural sector, and that really helped too. So for us, it would be really helpful to see over time whether the strategy actually took hold and whether we actually managed to be more sustainable in the end. But also, on the other hand, we have new regulation and new insights in the last years. So, for example, forced labor is very big on the agenda right now. We didn't have it back then in our indicator set. So this would be new information we need for this kind of analysis. And that would be really, really helpful. And as I said, waste on the downstream was really on the very heart of discussion. So our firms are still very dedicated to get the full picture of the whole the medical technology footprint, and that also includes, of course, the clients and the end users of all of our products.
Very, very good point, Anna. Thanks so much. We also had already a question in the chat on the downstream impact. So for everybody, again, downstream at the moment is not included in the benchmark study. That's a very good question. But first of all, thanks, Anna. So I understood that especially those data points provided you with huge insights, especially on the country level and how deep those impacts were accrued in the supply chain, so deep in the different tiers. That was one of your main insights, and we are really, really happy that it helped to drive action. And it's also good to hear that one benchmark study is not enough, but that we need continuous monitoring. That's also very helpful for us. That we need to have it on our agenda to bring updates on the benchmark study. That is very, very good point. Thanks so much, Anna, for those valuable insights.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and to go back in time when we first discussed the study and our results. And once again, I also felt that the whole energy changed. When you have the benchmark settled, you have all your resources available to actually do something and not be in these endless loops of methodology or how to calculate footprints or how to do reporting. So you actually can a lot do to diverse your strategy and energies within individual companies to do something about responsibility and not just write reports or do more research about methodological details. So that helped a lot. And for us, it's the only true course of social and ecological responsibility to have the full picture of a footprint.
Thanks so much, Anna. I would like to shift to the policy perspective now, but before we shift to the policy perspective, I would like to engage the audience again because we would love to hear what are your main goals on using those benchmarks. And again, you can click on the Menti link that is in the chat, and I would like you to ask on whether you like to understand where you stand in the market. You would like to use those benchmarks to set sustainability targets, to engage with internal stakeholders, engage with external stakeholders, or whether you would like to use those benchmarks for preparing for regulations. There's coming some answers here. So lots of different answers, but most of them would like to use those benchmarks for communicating with external stakeholders. That is a good insight, and I think that we can address this one. And with that, I would like to zoom out a little bit and look on how benchmarks can support and change at the system level, especially in the public and policy arena. So we will hear two policy use cases, one from Roman Godau and one from Dennis Oswald, highlighting on how those benchmarks can be used, especially in policy. So handing over to you, Roman.
Thank you so much, Richard. And since I have a quite unstable internet connection, please tell me if you don't hear me anymore. And when I start sharing my screen, I will switch off the camera. So we have an increased chance to stay online. Yes, and Richard, that's not the slide you expected. We could spend more time on the strategic potential, and I see so many benefits for companies leveraging impact valuation or impact transparency, but that's not my part today. And we heard how the benchmarks could provide a feasible starting point to start your impact journey. Another important angle is the policy perspective. And for the regulator or the standard setter too, it remains true that there are so many benefits for using the impact perspective. Speaking of the sector benchmark we just had before, and Christian touched already on that, policymakers could incentivize companies outperforming their sector in certain impact dimensions. And if needed, at the same time, they could sanction the ones underperforming. This, from my point of view, could easily unleash a race to the top, where every companies try to make or set best performance, best practices in their sector. But managing your company's impact, of course, has limits, and you have to watch the risk of jeopardizing your competitiveness as a company as well. And if you think about excluding or replacing a certain part of your value chain for its negative environmental or social impacts, you may do so, but if you're the only one in your sector doing so, then it's not only about sustainability gains, but about possibly weaken your ability to compete, which might lead to a possible first mover disadvantage. And if not for a company in reach to change the mechanics or the structure, governance, countries, regions, or international bodies are responsible. And that's exactly where the country benchmarks help to assess risks, guiding investments, inform decisions, or shape policies. And the benchmarks, again, not the sector benchmarks, but the country benchmarks, show where action is needed and possible. One has to understand how big the impacts are and where in the value chain they appear. When you look here on the slide on the right side, looking at the consumer goods sector in Australia, we see it has a 50 euro negative greenhouse gas impact per 1,000 euros output. But the benchmarks show that more than 80% of the negative impact is caused in the supply chain, most of it tier 1 or 2 suppliers. So it's obvious that this impact angle could directly lead to meaningful action by, in this case, the Australian government aiming for reduction in the tier 1, tier 2 impacts. We put together a collection of ideas to sort areas to use these benchmarks. And for example, development institutions could compare the urgency, the relevance, the potential outcomes of an intervention, and especially against their background of limited capacities. This would help to prioritize and steer their actions. So far, so good. I hope I stayed in time and be happy to hand over to Dennis right now and to answer some questions later on.
Thank you, Roman. You stayed in time, and I directly hand over to Dennis.
Thank you so much, Roman. And now I'm leaving a little bit the part from my first two use cases. It was for companies, within companies, and also for investors. And now I want to add some aspects to what Roman said about the policy perspective. And in my opinion, we are facing multiple crises globally and geopolitical, a difficult geopolitical situation. But in the end, the planet must survive, right? And that would be good. And so we need to think about who else should we inform, or whom do we need to invite to help to save the planet. And here is a picture again for the healthcare sector. And yes, WIFO is also measuring the social impact of products and intervention downstream, but not in part of this impact valuation. But it's part of the impact valuation, but only for the healthcare sector, not for the other sectors. And you can reach out to us. I read a comment. Here you can see, and this is something what I really think it's interesting. Here we are comparing a set of countries, right? In the same healthcare sector. You have the global average, what I already quoted before. That's 21 total impact euros in comparison to €1 revenues in environmental impacts, right? And now I'm flying around the world the last months and years, being in Latin America, last week in Mexico, in India. I was in India, and in India, my message was, look here, you have also a very huge healthcare sector in India, but look, you have nearly 5 times as high negative externalities as in average in global. And you can see now that there are best practices like France, Italy, UK, or take Switzerland, right? So maybe we need to use the communication between countries that they learn from each other. It's not about punishing them, blaming them, but showing them the potential to say, India, with a couple of easy low-hanging fruits can reduce within the healthcare sector your negative impact by the half. That should be a goal in the next 3 years. Very tangible. Modi can do it. He can ask all the colleagues, the G20 colleagues, what they do, how they did it, and it can work, right? And this we need to motivate them. And here you can see the same with social impacts, and you can see how heterogeneous they are. Indonesia, India again. So it's not about blaming them, supporting them with best practices to give them ideas how to reduce these negative impacts. And if they don't want to do it, maybe, and this is another use case, it's always about investing, right? So I talked about investor relations, but also the countries. Nearly every country in the world is highly indebted. They have limited budgets. If they now want to invest in climate change and impact, to reduce negative impacts, they need to have an investment. They need to maybe install large projects. Why, if we see that a reduction in negative externalities gives positive impacts to the country, to the world, why shouldn't development banks co-finance these projects? Because we can measure the positive impact in a reduction of the negative impacts, and this pays off. And this could be a trigger point, how ministers of finance, presidents in the world take this topic serious, because you see on both slides that a lot of countries have a lot of opportunities to reduce their negative impacts by every euro revenues. And last but not least, not only the business development, the development banks, but maybe also rating agencies could be part of the game. If such a matrix would be embedded in the rating system of rating agencies, and they would incentivize countries who are good in impact valuation or work on impact valuation, and measure it, get maybe a higher rating, then it would be really impactful, because every country needs to refinance old debts via new debts, and if they are cheaper due to a higher rating, that would be kind of a masterpiece to push, to save our planet. Thank you so much, Richard. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Even myself, I'm a little bit overwhelmed on how many use cases there are on those impact benchmarks. And maybe the most important thing that I took from the last two sessions is that there is definitely a need for collaborative action, so that we need to move together. And therefore, it's so important also to speak one and the same language in terms of data points. And that's, I think, one of the main important points why it's so important to have those benchmarks out there. However, now it's your turn, so the turn of all the audience. When we speak about collaborative action, we would also like to hear your voices. I know that we have only limited time for questions, so therefore I would like to remind you now that in case we are not able to answer all of your questions, you can always reach out to us. I will post a link where you can also directly create a meeting with one of our experts if you have further questions. So you can simply click on the link that is now coming in the chat, and the lead will yield you to such a page where you can meet our expert Katrin Oswald in case you have questions, or in case you want to engage with us. Please do not hesitate to directly schedule a meeting with our expert Katrin. So with that, I would like to open the floor to questions from the audience. You can simply raise your hand. We have still all of our experts in here. If there is no immediate questions, I think that we first take a third poll questions from our audience that you can see here. So what would be the most valuable? What would be most valuable for you to help to move forward with using those benchmarks? So we have several answers, potential answers. So what would be most helpful for you? Deep dive into benchmarks for my sector, a one-to-one conversation to explore our use cases, feedback on how to interpret results, or guidance on turning results into actions. That's a quite clear picture. So there is some who would like to have feedback on how to interpret those results, but most of the audience wants to have guidance on turning those results into actions. So if there is no immediate other question, I would like to hand over to the audience on whether you have some advices and guidance on how to use those benchmarks. Christian, may I ask you, what is your main guidance on how to use those benchmarks to drive action?
So as we're working with companies, I think this is more for internal decision making, to make the key decision makers aware if I'm really performing better or worse than the industry. This is for me the key guidance to make use of these benchmarks, but also posing maybe a question, because this was the key point, I think, from the speech when I'm looking to Dennis. The question is how to motivate. So benchmarks are signaling where we have outperformance or underperformance. But is this sufficient to drive action? This is the big question. In most cases, at least for the business community, it will not be. Dennis made one point which is quite important. This is all around access and cost of capital. So the question is, how can this be used with regards to capital allocation? But the other big question is, how can we move policymakers to make use of these kinds of benchmark to drive policy making? And here I have still a huge question mark. So anyone who has ideas to push this forward is more than welcome.
Thanks so much, Christian. I think some of the speakers also already answered on guidance, because the main use of those benchmarks and impact data is always to prioritize action. So it doesn't tell you directly what to do, but it definitely helps you to prioritize which action points you should take. Anna, do you want to, or Dennis? Yes, jump in.
Just one fun fact I learned recently. I always try to compare countries with companies, right? And companies always say, okay, can the countries or the governments, they are so short-minded, right? And they take short decisions. And then I said, but how about companies, right? They are reporting on quarterly basis and they are under pressure and they need even earlier success. And that's the reason why I want to make a point. We need to find use cases which are paying off immediately, which are creating a benefit immediately. So that the quick wins, right? We need to not only think, oh, what can we do strategically with it, but do we find use cases which really make someone happy who is dealing with impact valuation, right?
Thanks
so much for this point. Anna.
Yeah, so for us, it was really to tackle the pain points. So to, to find motivator naps may be really, really different. So for us, it was like a sector comparison to finally be able, be better than the damn automobiles or something. So it's really, really individual, but it can pay a return in communicational terms, so you can have something to communicate to your patients, to your partners, but also it's a really honest way to communicate to your suppliers, even in the deep chain, that, for example, you won't accept any human rights violations and you have data that it's happening. So for us, it was really to find these little knobs in a very specific internal setting to get benchmarks into use. And then you may settle into a routine where you actually just check the data regularly and find, for example, a deterioration of one indicator, and then you get really, really nervous, and then it gets its own rhythm.
Thanks so much, Anna. I think that is a very, very nice conclusion, and we are nearly at the end of our session. So I would like to say thank you to all the participants, and especially thank you to the speakers, Dennis, Christian, Roman, Anna. Thanks so much for being here and sharing those insights. For all the audience, we will share the recording. And you again, feel free to reach out to us and register to discuss individual use cases. And have a nice afternoon. Looking forward to see you all soon. Thanks so much.
Richard.